I want people to throw out their list, right? The man menu or the woman menu, right? Of like, oh, this tall color hair, drives this car, has, this salary, whatever, 401k, all those things that your brain is thinking that you want. Your heart doesn't care about those things. When you're really doing the deep visioning that's in the manifestation processes in that section of the book, it's really looking at what is the dynamic between the two of you? What do you want that to be like? How do you want that person to support you when you're going through a tough time? How do you want them to respond when you're triggered? How do you want to move through conflict together? Are you able to move through conflict together? Conflict is part of the deal.
And underneath all of this is what we call the responsibility equation. When somebody has a problem with you, it's their problem. And when you have a problem with someone, it's your problem, right? And when you think about this, you go, oh, so that other person has a problem with me. I don't have to fix them. I don't have to make them feel better. I don't have to try to calm them down, right? It's not my responsibility. Now, it doesn't mean that you throw it in their face and you go, well, that's your problem. That's not mine, right? Because that's not loving or kind.
Hello, darlings, and welcome to Not Over, Just Different. I'm Natalie Ledwell, and I'm here to share deeply insightful and vulnerable conversations with you from people who are willing to open up and share what their journey's been like so that you can learn and be inspired to take action in yours. It's never too late to begin again or to see a new perspective. No matter what your dreams or goals are, you'll find inspiration and community here. It's time to rediscover yourself, reignite your passions, and make the next 50 years even more full than the first. Well, hello everyone and welcome to the podcast for this week. This week, I have my good friends, Matthew and Orna Walters. Hello guys, how are you?
Hi, Natalie.
You're doing excellent. Great to see you.
Yeah, you're so happy to be here.
You guys look awesome. Now, the reason I have these guys here is because they have a new book that's just come out. It's called Getting It Right This Time. Break free from your hidden block to lasting love. Matthew and Orna are fantastic at helping to guide women and men to be able to release some of the old programs and beliefs that we have about love from maybe previous relationships and so forth, but to how to get ourselves into a place where we're really ready for a next relationship and what they could possibly look like, and to get rid of a lot of the old, the beliefs and myths that are around love.
We serve anybody who has a heart. So anybody who has a heart and wants love. But I think a lot of our messaging really resonates with particularly midlife women that are looking for love later in life. But, every now and then you have that old soul person who's like, wait, this love thing isn't easy for me. And we help a lot of those people too. So,
yeah. And you guys, how long have you been doing this?
Almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start from the beginning, because I know that when I was looking for love, I had to clear a whole ton of thoughts and old programs and beliefs about myself and about love in general to be able to get myself ready to be open to something like that. So what are some of the common things that you see that, women or people in our midlife that we think that's kind of really being a roadblock between us and our love and happiness?
Well, one of the really common ones, especially in midlife, is this idea that you have to give up your freedom in order to have a relationship. And when you have these kind of conflicting thoughts, well, part of me really wants this, but part of me also knows that I need this. And these two things feel in opposition to each other. When you have that internal struggle in that way, you're going to be stuck. We call it a double bind. And when you're in a double bind, it's like you're arm wrestling yourself and you're equally strong on both sides. So you never win, you never lose. And we oftentimes find that people who are stuck in these kind of conflicting thoughts, these double binds, that they start to lose their motivation. They start to lose their inspiration for finding love because they feel stuck and they don't know how to get unstuck.
Yeah, I know for me, I think one of the big things, because I was 50, 52, I think, when I met Bert. But in my mind, it was like, well, no one of the appropriate age, men, want to date a woman of my age. They're just only going to want to date younger women. That was a belief that I had. What it felt like for me is that I'd take 2 steps forward, but then I'd take, 3 steps back. Because I was like, yeah, but that's not going to happen. And now I'm going to get excited about this. They're not going to find me attractive or whatever. And I think too that when we go through the end of a relationship, like a marriage or something, we kind of take a hit to our self-worth, or at least our self-image. Is that what you find?
Absolutely. It's only in love that we are in reaction to the past. Only when it comes to love. Every other part of our life, we are set up to know that there's going to be setbacks and disappointments. You know, you never had a friend call you, Natalie, and be like, oh, I had a terrible day. I was at work and I asked for a raise and I didn't get it. So I quit. And now I'm looking for a job where I never have to ask for a raise. Like you would think that person's lost their marbles, right? And so this whole idea that one of the biggest blocks is that people date backwards because they're looking for this feeling. And this is the big problem is our subconscious mind highlights what is familiar. And if what is familiar, particularly from your family of origin, like we learn to do everything, walk, talk, tie your shoes, and, love. We have a template for love that we learn in our family of origin. And so if what you desire is not familiar, you're in a different kind of stuck. And so these are really what we call those hidden blocks to love. Those hidden blocks are those things that you don't even realize because you're looking for this ding, ding, ding signal. And because the subconscious will give you that for a familiar person, that doesn't mean that familiar person is an ideal match for you. And so, I like to use myself as an example. I grew up in a home with abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It was very chaotic and toxic. And so I found myself in my 20s in a relationship with a guy that I thought was a guy. And then on New Year's Eve of 1994, he tried to kill me. So I don't want to be a downer about it, but I like to sort of use it's almost hyperbolic, right? It's like this big dramatic thing that happened to me. And I struggled with love into my 40s. And yet here I am sitting next to this amazing man who I'm lucky to be married to. And he also struggled with love, even though he grew up in this like idyllic, it seemed like this idyllic childhood.
Yeah, I mean, my parents were married for 57 years when my mom passed. And even in the friends I had growing up, because my parents, we literally lived in the same neighborhood as their grade school friends. I mean, that's the kind of life we had. It was this idyllic little community where everybody knew each other forever. They were all large families, like 5, 7 kids, and we all played together. And everybody looked to our family as like this ideal. We weren't dysfunctional like all of them were, but our dysfunction was more covert as opposed to overt, right? And when you have covert dysfunction in your family of origin, it's oftentimes more difficult to identify because you look back and you say, wow, I had a really great childhood. I don't know why I struggle in love. But when I started doing the work of looking at my own blocks and looking at my own stories around love, what I realized was being the youngest of 5 and having 3 older brothers who were relatively close to me in age, I spent most of my early childhood trying to keep up with them. And I couldn't because physically I hadn't developed, mentally I hadn't developed like they had. They were just more developed than me. So I couldn't keep up. So I always felt like there was something wrong with me. And I always felt like I was going to screw things up. And so as an adult, when I got into relationships, one is I chased rejection. Subtle rejection I would get from women would be a turn on, right? Because that felt right because I was being rejected in my family.
Because it was familiar.
Yeah, it felt very familiar. And the other thing was when I met somebody that was really great and a relationship started, I'd have this niggling thought in the back of my head is like, well, wait till you really get to know me. I don't think you're going to like me as much as you think you do. And I would sabotage that relationship because I grew up screwing things up, quote unquote. Right. And so when we look at these stories, we call these stories your love imprint. And your love imprint is how you learn to receive love in your family of origin. And sometimes it's directly related to one or both parents, but also can be influenced by siblings, by if there's a grandparent that was part of raising you. But it comes down to this idea that internally you have a GPS for love. And you will subconsciously seek that out over and over again because it feels familiar.
Yeah, and the thing is, we all have that. We all have some kind of a program around the experience that we had when we were younger. So finding out what our imprint is sounds like it's, the first step to going, okay, now that we know what we've subconsciously been, exactly.
Chapter 4. Don't skip to chapter 4 because you need the groundwork of 1, 2, and 3 before you get to 4 about your love imprint.
Yeah. But understanding that to go, right. So, I think sometimes the imprint can be working for our highest favor. Maybe there's parts of it that we keep, but there's other parts you go, yeah, that's not serving me. I need to kind of release that.
Yeah, right. There are people where their love imprint affects every area of life. And then there's others where it just affects their love life. And, we're complex as human beings. And so sometimes it spills over and sometimes it's kind of contained in that one area.
I think also another common thing that I see, and which we're sure you do as well, is that when we are looking for love, we're relying on that other person and that relationship to make us happy or to make us feel love.
Oh, sure. There's a big flaw in that. It frustrates me a bit. Like our society has an obsession with A Star is Born. That movie has been made 4 times now. It's had 4 incarnations of A Star is Born, where she doesn't believe in herself until the man believes in her. I find that happens. It can happen for men or women or whatever gender identity you may have. But it's this thing where you're waiting for love to be bestowed upon you. And that's a big problem because through the dating process, is when you know your value and you know your worth and you know how to love yourself, then the dating process, you can evaluate the other person's capacity to meet your needs. And this is the step that most people skip altogether because they rush into exclusivity as soon as they have all the good feelings. And then they want all that, all the chemistry, and they want to jump to intimacy, physical intimacy. And so I think there's so many dating coaches that we know all around the world that tell people to sort of go slowly, right? Do love slowly and don't rush. And I want to say to everybody, we're not asking you to date like it's 1952. That's not what we're saying. But in order to select an ideal match for the long term, your head and your heart must be in harmony for that ideal match. And so if it's only your heart telling you to move forward, or your loins, or it's just your brain without the chemistry of the spark, there's a mismatch. And so you need both of these things to really go the long haul.
One of the issues with dating when we're looking for love to be bestowed upon us is we get stuck on what we call the hope to disappointment roller coaster. Because you're looking for this vision, this thing, whether you call it your soulmate or your partner or whatever however you label that, you're looking for these external things about this person, right? And when you see them in a profile, or you have a great conversation with somebody, you instantly start hoping, oh, this could be my person. And like Orna said, if there's a connection, we jump into exclusivity because we don't like dating. We don't like having to meet people who we aren't attracted to, right? We don't like having to meet people who aren't very fun to sit and talk to for an hour. So let's avoid all of that by getting into a relationship with the first person who is fun to talk to for an hour, and I feel this attraction and I feel this chemistry. And then it doesn't work out, whether it's 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever the short-term sort of thing is. And then there's this disappointment of, oh, I thought this could have been the person and it didn't work out. And so you got to muster up the energy again. And then you meet another person 2 to 3 months and then it doesn't work out and then you crash again. And you wear yourself out. We call it dating burnout because you wear yourself out hoping that this next person's gonna be the one. Instead of, like Orna said, taking your time, evaluating them, being more discerning before you jump into exclusivity.
Right. And so what does that actually look like? You say going slow. I'm like, okay, but what does that actually look like?
Well, it looks very different than what most people do because you're not looking for your match in a profile. In the beginning, when we start with a client in our coaching package, they'll say, oh, I really like this person. And we're like, oh, how many dates have you been on? Oh, I haven't met them yet. That'll really create dating burnout. So first off, nothing is real until you've been physically in the same space with that person because the brain science of attraction works this way. Your mind fills in the blanks. So the more blanks there are, the more your mind will fill it in. So in the early part of a relationship, our mind slants things towards the positive with all that hope of wanting to find somebody. And then after you're with somebody, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, your mind starts to slant things towards the negative. It can be unfortunate, right? So this idea of going slowly, number one, is to really evaluate the person in the dynamic in which they are with you. Because most people are conflict avoidant. And so we want to avoid the uncomfortable conversations. Like right now, we're living in this time that's so full of polarity. And it's a great time to date, but most people think it's a terrible time to date. But it's awesome because there is so much polarity. If you don't avoid those uncomfortable conversations, you'll end up finding somebody where you're a values match. Because if you don't value the same things, you won't make it through the long haul. And so you have to be able to value the same things to get back on the same page. And the other part is people look for dating somebody that's like them. And the thing is, that's a platonic friendship. when you have a lot in common. We hear all the time that opposites attract. And so that values match is very important because it's very different than being like that person. And you only find out what somebody values by spending quality time with that person. And so that's what the going slowly is about, to discover who they are. The guy who's washing and waxing his car himself, every Sunday afternoon values that car. And so you're not going to find out what somebody values by having these long, deep, meaningful conversations. Everybody's looking for their shortcut. And a lot of people get sucked into these, what they think are these meaningful conversations with this, or discussing these hypothetical situations. Well, until you're actually in it making decisions together, you don't know what their values are going to be. So you have to spend some time. I always say, don't pay so much attention to what it's like in the beginning when it's all fresh and new and everything's going great. Wait a bit and see how you manage those bumps in the road.
Is it time for a career change? Find out with our free 30-second quiz. This simple yet potent tool will help you determine if a new career path is right for you. Don't miss out the chance to turn your life around. Go to mymovies.com/career quiz.
Yeah, or see them in different environments, in different situations.
Absolutely. Traveling together will speed things up. Traveling together is always a great indicator of whether you can do that. I still remember our first trip was a camping trip up in Idlewild here in California and up in the mountains. And I remember coming down the mountain, and Matthew at some point looks at me with this big smile on his face and he says, "Travel well together." Check. It was one of those things.
Yeah, that was Bert and I too. Within the first month, we did the road trip up to Monterey, and we're like, okay, we can travel well together. That's all right.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it sounds like, obviously with what I do at My Movies, I help people get very clear about what they want. So it seems to me that, before that you even start looking for love, you got to have a pretty clear idea of what love means to you, or what life looks like for you, right?
Yeah. So we broke the book down into 3 sections, and it's a great way to talk about this because the first section is awareness. And awareness is like, what is the "you are here" spot on the map? What are my emotional stories I have about love that may be blocking me? What limiting beliefs do I have about love? What's my love imprint? What are these internal, mostly subconscious stories that are keeping me from what I want? The second section of the book is called transformation. And that's where we walk people through releasing these stories so that they can have a fresh eye, a fresh view. And then the final stage is manifestation. And that's when you really get clear from this new place about what you really want, what your heart really desires. Because your heart doesn't desire the opposite of what you don't want. You can't manifest that way, right? You don't manifest the opposite of what you don't want. If your experience is that you've been dating or married to people who cheated on you, your ideal relationship isn't not a cheater.
Yeah, you don't need to include those things. You really don't. And instead of looking, I want people to throw out their list, right? The man menu or the woman menu, right? Of like, oh, this tall color hair drives this car, has this salary, whatever, 401k, all those things that your brain is thinking that you want. Your heart doesn't care about those things. When you're really doing the deep visioning that's in the manifestation processes in that section of the book, it's really looking at what is the dynamic between the two of you? What do you want that to be like? How do you want that person to support you when you're going through a tough time? How do you want them to respond when you're triggered? How do you want to move through conflict together? Are you able to move through conflict together? Conflict is part of the deal. I guess the bad news of today is, look, you're never going to find somebody that's a mind reader and also just never have a conflict or miscommunication with the person you share your life with. So learning how to take those conflicts and turn them into a deeper connection is where love grows deeper. I want to show you and share with your audience a bit of what that's like, because I think back to when Natalie and I first started dating, and sure, it was amazing and it had all the great magical feelings and all that good stuff. Magic, first of all, is not a plan for love. So in order to plan for love, I want to let everybody know that first stage, that romance phase, that piece where we always talk about falling in love, like I tripped on a banana peel and I landed on Matthew, right? I look back at that romance phase, I have great memories, but it, quite frankly, after all these years together, it feels a little shallow. Right now, after all these years together, and of course, we spend an exorbitant amount of time together because we work together too, and we're married. There's so much like breadth and depth. It's like, there's that song, right? My love is as deep as the ocean, as high as the sky. That's really what it feels like, because we've navigated through much stuff together And we've learned to take those conflicts into deeper connection. That strategy that we've developed is really in the book as well.
So you've got strategies on how to navigate conflict?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's touch on that a little bit, because I know in the beginning with Bert, I was like, he was triggered, I was triggered, my trigger is triggering, his trigger is all trigger all over the place. It was not good.
Yeah. Step one is recognizing and acknowledging that you are triggered, right? Oftentimes we externalize it, right? We put it on the other person. You're doing this, you're saying this, you're trying to control me, you're trying to, whatever your story is.
Or you're making me feel this way.
You're making me feel this
Exactly.
way, right? And as long as it's external like that, you can't do anything about it because you cannot control another person.
Right.
You can't get them to behave the way you want them to. So your first step is to acknowledge, oh, I'm triggered. And when you acknowledge you're triggered, you've got to step away. You've got to step away from that conversation. You've got to stop talking to each other, because when you're both triggered and you're communicating, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, your brain is offline when you're triggered. So when you recognize it, you take a pause. And for some couples, that might mean that you have a prearranged time that, okay, we're going to take this long a pause, in the moment instead of trying to come up with a time in the moment. Because a lot of times when when you are triggered, you'll be like, I'm out of here. You think you're going to be gone for 5 hours and really you're ready to come back home in 20 minutes. So you might have a prearranged time. Like we have a prearranged time that if we take a pause, we check back in. If we don't come together before, we have to check back in an hour. We're both very passionate people, so we sometimes need a little extra time to calm down. And you know that we're passionate because you know us, Natalie, but it's okay to be passionate and it's okay to feel your feelings, but your brain is offline when you're triggered. So it's your job, not your partner's job, to regulate and calm your own nervous system. And so when you're calmed down, now you can come together. And there's a lot of these exercises in the book about what happens from that point on, because when you come together, it's important that you use essentially some sort of nonviolent communication template. We call it the shift, the speak how you feel template. And when you speak your feelings instead of going over the plot points of the disagreement, and you're just saying, this is what's going on with me, I feel, fill in the blank, then you can create an emotional intimacy. Because what we have found is emotional intimacy does not require agreement. Generally, when there's a disagreement, people get obsessed with agreement. And that's an ego desire. Again, your heart doesn't care about that. So throw your ego out. All you want is to be back on the same page and be emotionally connected with the other person. A lot of times we don't look at what went wrong or who was right or any of that stuff. Because if I'm right, the person I love most in all the world is now wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong. So releasing that ego desire, you can come together and just share your authenticity, to share your truth. That speak how you feel, the shift is throughout the book from once we introduce it. So that shift template is so important. And again, it's not a template that gets people to behave the way you want them to. If anybody out there knows a template that gets people to behave the way you want them to, please send it over to Love on Purpose, because we want that template so we can get people to behave the way we want them to. We know there's no such thing, but this leverages your ability to be heard by the other person.
And for you to hear them.
And for you to hear them.
Exactly. And underneath all of this is what we call the responsibility equation. And this has shown up in a lot of different ways. The version we love goes like this. When somebody has a problem with you, it's their problem. And when you have a problem with someone, it's your problem, right? And when you think about this, you go, oh, so that other person has a problem with me. I don't have to fix them. I don't have to make them feel better. I don't have to try to calm them down. Right? It's not my responsibility. Now, it doesn't mean that you throw it in their face and you go, well, that's your problem. That's not mine, right? Because that's not loving or kind. But what it means is you are not responsible for your partner's happiness. They are, right? And when you say, well, when I have a problem with someone, that's my problem, you go, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to try to get them to behave differently because this is my problem. I need to look at how I'm thinking, how I'm reacting to this situation, and take responsibility for that, because then I'm put in the power to change it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, guys, I've known you for many years, and I know that the book is really a manifestation of the work that you do in the world. And I've known that you've attended the weddings of many of your clients because they get great results from working with you. So could you share a story or share like a common thread of the kind of relationships that people are able to achieve through working with you?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you, Natalie. I don't think anybody's asked us that one before. All the interviews we've done, that's a really, really good one. I think really, I'm proud to say that even after a global pandemic, all of our clients that chose to get married to each other are still married. So we have lots of Love on Purpose clients out there in the world. And it was just the end of the year. And towards the end of the year, people send us like their Christmas, newsletter, their whatever they send out, to their friends and family. And we get that too. And they update us on them. And they usually send a little note with it saying, thank you so much. And we get a lot of notifications about, their children's birthdays or their anniversaries. We had a bunch of weddings this last year. I want to use this example of a client that we officiated their wedding last February on Valentine's Day in Maui. It was really special. And I think this particular client has a universal sort of theme because she felt like she had to keep twisting into a pretzel to not upset the people she cared about in her life. And so much of it was really being okay with being authentic, being okay to share how they feel, even if it might create that disagreement. And she's in this wonderful relationship. But what's really interesting about it is the relationship with her ex-husband changed dramatically through our work together because she was no longer on the defensive, taking every single thing, worried about a conflict and shrinking whenever she had to ask for something or sending the kids back and forth. And so there's this deeper ability to really love yourself through this process. So instead of putting on like a coat of confidence and kind of fake it till you make it and sort of present yourself one way in the dating process and then sort of struggle with who you are in the relationship, the dating process is filled in our process. The dating process lets you practice the tools for lasting love. And so it makes it easy to not, we were talking about slowing the process down and you said, what does it look like? Maybe this is a better answer to that question too, because when people sort of date in the beginning to discover about themselves and practice the tools for lasting love through the dating process, that way their selection process is automatically slowed down, but then their selection is based on that values match that we talked about. That's so important.
I want to share just a quick piece about that wedding because it was so magical. And they wrote their own vows. So we're only working with one person in the couple. Right? Usually the man or the woman, we only have one person that we're giving all these tools and this knowledge and this help and this transformation with. And I think people oftentimes wonder, well, I'm doing all this work. How am I going to meet somebody who's also doing work like this? Right? How am I going to meet somebody who can match me at that level? But the thing is, people do their work in the way they do it. And when he shared his vows, there was this piece where he talked about when she gets upset, how important it is for him to stop and pay attention and be there for her and to really allow her to have her upset. It was in their vows, his commitment to be there through her feelings, whether they were comfortable or uncomfortable or whatever they were. And we didn't coach him to say that. We didn't do anything. He came with that in who he was. Because as you raise the level at which you value yourself, you meet somebody, water seeks its own level in relationship. You're not going to go up here and end up in a relationship with somebody who's down here. Somebody's going to rise to meet you, and that person will show up because you've been showing up for yourself.
Right. I love that. All right, guys. So this is the book. Where do we send people to get a copy of this book? Getting it right this time.
And you can go to your favorite retailer. So wherever you buy books, it'll be there. You can also go to our website. It's featured there at loveonpurpose.com.
Perfect. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time today. And like the divorce rates are astronomical. Like it's over 50% now, isn't it?
No, it's about 48%.
Right.
In North America. So not globally, but 48% of first marriages end in divorce. But here's the startling thing. The rate goes up the more times, that you get married. And I think sometimes people think this is discouraging, but I want to caution you because we don't get better at a relationship if we just switch out our partner. Because that divorce rate skyrockets in third marriages at 75%.
Right.
75% of third marriages end in divorce. So that's why we say it starts with you. The work starts with you. So going through a deep inner transformation, then your outer world experience changes.
Absolutely. So I encourage you to get your hands on a copy of this book. It's going to really help you so much to be able to, clear the past and get yourself ready for, love that's going to last for the second chapter of your life. Would be amazing. And you can also connect with Orna and Matthew at loveonpurpose.com. So thank you for joining us today, guys. Fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Natalie. And just as our friend, our dear friend, I just want to give you a shout out to say thank you for all your love and support. We just really value you and treasure you. And thank you for having us share our book with your audience. Thank you so much.
Love you guys.
Love you too.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Not Over, Just Different. If you felt inspired by this episode, please subscribe and drop a comment below to let us know what you loved. My goal is to reignite the spark that you may think you've lost and cultivate a space where no matter what walk of life you are, you can step into the world with power and confidence. I would love to hear your reviews. It helps us to reach more incredible women like you. So until next time, keep growing, keep striving, and keep believing in the power of your potential. Here's to living your best life now.